I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Scott is a good friend of mine. We go way back together. We worked together for many years at Aramco. And Scott is now retired and living in Tennessee, but I dragged him out of retirement because I heard people raving about his presentation and his training that he did on wood floor surfaces. So Scott is going to join us and share with us a little bit of a quick glimpse into some day-long training that he's been doing on wood floor care and help you take an honest look at to see whether that's a subject matter and a service offering which your company would be interested in. So Scott, take over, bud.
Well, thank you, Doyle, for the nice introduction there. I apologize if at any time I get out of breath. I'm trying to take a 2-day class into a 40-minute time slot, so I may talk fast at times and forget to breathe, but I hope there's a lot of benefit here. One of the key things that we want to share with people is that wood floors is not something you need to be afraid of. You really want to appear to be the expert. Earlier, Sean talked about the difference of the professional cleaner coming into the home versus the house cleaning service with the Hoover vacuum. Well, we want you to be the professional in the eyes of your clients and potential clients. So we're going to talk a little bit about wood to educate you on that subject. So I'll share the screen with you here. Certainly the market for wood flooring is growing. If you're doing residential work, it's sure that a lot of the homes you're going into have wood floor. When I started my carpet cleaning business, which was actually back in the late 1960s, every home had carpet pretty much throughout. You wouldn't see as much wood floors. But now maybe we're seeing carpet in the bedrooms and wood floors out in the family area or the living room, such as that. We don't want you to miss out on any opportunities because you probably have the ability to clean every kind of flooring that's there. The hardwood sales in 2019, which is the last year that they've got the figures totaled out for, amounted to about 13% of all the flooring installed, and it looks like that's going to increase a little bit for 2020. In fact, the only year in the last decade plus where hardwood flooring has not had an increase was during the recession in 2018. And these figures come from the July 27th floor covering statistical report. So what key points do you need to keep in mind? First, there's not just one way to do it. There are several different ways to clean hardwoods, and they're all going to give you good results. But there are certain things that you're going to need to watch out for. And again, if you're going to be the expert, you need to know something about wood. So know what the options are, become the expert, eliminate your fear of working with wood. Why would people choose hardwood? Well, it's the real thing, and that's very popular. There's a lot of flooring that imitates wood or stone or other surfaces, but those are the things that are trying to copy wood because of its popularity. Wood is the real thing, and especially if we're talking about a solid hardwood floor, it's probably going to last as long as any part of that building. Even if it needs to be sanded occasionally over the years, 25, 50 years, even 100 years is not unrealistic lifetime for a solid hardwood floor. It's very durable, and its long lasting makes it worth the investment people will have in hardwood. But because of that investment, people will want to protect that. Keep that in mind when we're pricing this service, that this is a valuable investment they have. They don't want to mistreat it have it cleaned by somebody that's not a professional and might really mess things up for them. They want to keep that investment for a long time. Of course, it is expensive. It is more sensitive to moisture than some other types of flooring. Can get scratches, can get dents in at those high heel marks or the dog's claws or the can of beans that's dropped while you're unpacking the groceries. And one feature that may not be recognized right away to all the cleaners is that it reacts to light. So wood that's been exposed to ultraviolet light, specifically sunlight, over a longer period of time may gradually change colors. And there'll be a difference in the appearance and color of the wood, maybe that's under furniture or under a rug, compared to what's been in an area where it's exposed to a lot of sunlight. So some of those are the downsides to remember and correct. There's a lot of different species of hardwoods. Each one is different. And one of the key things that's different about them is the hardness. The test for hardness is called the Janka test. And what they do is they take this ball that's 0.44 millimeters, a little steel ball bearing essentially, and measure the pressure it takes to push that ball halfway into a piece of wood. So that'll give a number rating that says how hard that is. Now, for residential use, you want to have a hardness rating that starts at least at 1,000. If it's softer than 1,000, it's going to get scratches and indentations very easily. If it's going to be in a high traffic area, still residential, but a lot of traffic, probably going to want something 1,300, 1,400 or more. And if we go into go from residential to commercial settings that even have more traffic, probably 1,600 or higher would be the rating you'd be looking at. And also be aware that these different species react to light differently. Some on how fast they change color, and even in do they get darker or do they get lighter with exposure to ultraviolet light. That's different between species. Now we talk about hardwood, and obviously that implies there's also some softwoods. What is the official difference between a hardwood and a softwood? Well, it's something you should know if you're going to be talking to customers about their wood floors. And it's not the obvious thing. Hardwood is not just hardwood because it's harder. Some hardwood is softer than some softwood. What is the difference? Basically, hardwood comes from trees that are deciduous, those trees that lose their leaves, where softwood comes from evergreens, generally trees with needles, ones that don't lose their leaves. There's a chart that shows where some of the different woods rank on the hardness scale. You see that pine and fir, which do come from pine trees, they're softwoods, they're down around 500. And then you get up to those that are over 1,000. One of the most common floors for hardwood is white oak. That's up around 1,300 to 1,400. And some are even close to 3,000 with the Brazilian cherry. So you may be talking about solid hardwood. You may be talking about engineered wood. We'll explain what each of those are. Bamboo and cork are two other products that are generally considered together along with being wood floors. So let's look at first at the hardwood. It can come in a type that's finished on site. In other words, it gets to the construction site as material that hasn't yet been finished. I'm going to stop the PowerPoint for a second so I can show you that. There's a piece, you can see it's one solid piece of wood, flutes on the bottom, made for tongue and groove, but it's not yet been finished. And there's some pictures at various stages along the construction. You'll see various pictures of the floor there from where it's being installed to where the finish is being applied on site to a finished floor. And then you can also have pre-finished. That means the manufacturer has finished the wood before it arrives on the construction site. So here's an example of that. Again, you can see it's a tongue and groove. It's a solid piece of wood, but there's already a finish on it. And you see the installation of the pre-finished floor being done here. One of the popular treatments for hardwood right now is to give it some texture, some authenticity, or some look of history to it. Maybe what they call hand scraped. And of course, there is things authentically done by hand. A lot of times that hand scraped look is done by machine, but it simply shows the imperfections that might come from doing something with hand tools rather than with large machine tools. Or it may be distressed. It's banged up a little bit, gives it an embossed look or a rustic look. There's even reclaimed hardwood, which means that the lumber was once maybe part of a building or something else before it became that hardwood floor. Now, hardwood can be cut in three directions: cross-section, radial, or tangent. And I'm going to get a roll of paper towels, and we're going to pretend that this is a tree trunk, because I could not bring a tree trunk into my office. So here's my tree trunk roll of towels. And my saw, if I cut down the tree this direction, that's the cross section. Now I could also cut it right through the middle. See if that gets on camera. Cut it lengthwise. And that's going to be a radial cut because it goes along the radius of the circle. I could also cut off a section off to the side. I'm still cutting it lengthwise, but I'm not cutting it through or near the center of it. That's what's known as the tangent cut. So you'll see each of those there. Now, why is it important to know how they cut the wood? What direction did their saws run in cutting up this wood? Well, let's see. Here shows what's called quarter sawn, and quarter sawn, and it's similar to another term, rift sawn. Most of the lengthwise cuts go radially. That is, they're close to being a radius of the round trunk of the tree, the round piece of lumber. Whereas the flat cut are more tangent cuts. And you'll notice the direction of the grain is going to be different depending on how it's cut. And that affects how it expands or contracts as it gains or loses moisture. You'll see the flat cut piece tends to expand in the width, that tangent cut. But the radial cut, that board's going to tend to expand in the height. Now, if you've got moisture there that's excessive and that wood absorbs that moisture, it does much less damage if that wood expands vertically, that is in the thickness of the wood, than if it expands in the width of the plank. And then it's pushing against other planks, and it could result in bowing and warping and that kind of thing. Now, wood does expand in all directions, but it expands primarily or more significantly in one direction than another. So here's an example of how a piece of tree might be laid out for either rift or quarter sawn, and you'll see most of the cuts there, all of them in the rift sawn and the majority of them in the quarter sawn on the right, run through a radius of the tree trunk. You'll be able to notice this if you look at the grains. Of course, each type of wood, each species has a little bit different grain, but notice how you get those arcs, arches, whorls in the plain or flat sawn wood. But if you've got the quarter sawn wood, made from the radial cuts, the grain tends to be more up and down through the thickness of the board and tends to be closer to straight lines rather than being those big loops and arches that we saw just a second ago. So what happens when wood takes on moisture? It's going to change its dimensions in all three directions, all three planes, but each one's going to be different. And it's going to have one plane or one direction in which it expands more than others. And that's why it may matter how those boards are cut. The amount of moisture in the wood also is important. This chart kind of shows the moisture content typically in different parts of the country at both the driest and the most humid part of the year. Typically, when wood is shipped from the manufacturer, it's going to have somewhere between 8 and 9% moisture content. So you can see if that wood got shipped out to Utah or to Nevada, the Rocky Mountain areas there, they tend to be drier than that. The wood is going to lose some moisture as it adjusts or comes to equilibrium with its environment. So that wood's going to effectively shrink up a little bit. The installer better know that. On the other hand, if that was sent to a coastal area like, say, Florida, where the humidity might be 13%, that wood's going to grow in size because it's going to be absorbing moisture from its environment. Again, the installer better allow time for acclimation so the wood gets to the size it's going to stay in that environment, whatever it may be, before they install it. Otherwise, you can get bowing and warping and cupping and such. So here's a look at how the different grain patterns may clue you into what species of wood you're dealing with. The top shows the end of the wood. You see how the quarter sawn pieces would look, and then how the tangent cut pieces would look in that species. And same, just a couple different species here. Now, if we go from the solid wood, which remember could either be unfinished at the site or could be pre-finished, we're going to engineered wood. Now, engineered wood is still 100% wood. It's wood all the way through, but it's not one solid piece of wood. It's layers of wood. The top layer will be that hardwood, and that's what it's going to look like once it's down finished on the floor. But it may have 3 to as many as 9 different layers of wood. Those in-between layers may be more like wood scraps or plywood or who knows what, depending on the particular product that's there. But it's all wood. It's different layers of wood. And these layers are turned different directions. What's the advantage of that? Well, you remember, according to how it's cut and how the grain runs, wood's going to want to expand in different directions or different planes. If all the parts of that wood are turned in different direction, each one wants to expand a different direction when it's subject to moisture and humidity. And so they kind of tug and pull against each other and resist each other. And it tends to move much less with moisture than a solid piece of wood does. Generally, our engineered wood would be pre-finished. And the key thing to think about is how thick is that top layer. In this particular cutaway, you notice it says it's 3.6 millimeters thick, that surface layer, sometimes called the wear layer, but that gets a little confusing because there's other things we call wear layers in flooring too. So I prefer the term surface layer. But some point in time, that wood may need to be screened or sanded. Now, sanding generally removes 3 or more millimeters of the wood. Well, could you sand this? Probably not. You wouldn't really have much of the hardwood left. You might be able to screen it, which removes between 1 and 2 millimeters of that top surface layer, but you probably couldn't sand it if that's what was needed to restore some damage to the wood. On the other hand, if that top surface layer of hardwood was 6 or 7 or 8 millimeters thick, it could go through a sanding and there'd still be enough of it left to give you a durable top surface that still had the appearance of hardwood. So that's an important distinction between different grades of engineered wood. How thick is that hardwood surface layer? So how many layers, why they're there, and how do they get that thin top layer? You notice the diagram here shows a round log being sheared with knives that cut off a very thin layer there. We don't know if it's going to be a 3 millimeter, 6 millimeter or what, but it's taken off a thin layer. There's another view of it. And we're going to go back to my paper towel tree trunk here. Let's imagine that we've got this round tree trunk, and now I'm taking this big blade and slicing a thin layer off. Just as that round tree trunk rolls, I continue slicing off more and more of that thin layer. Well, think about what happens if I take one layer of that towel off and lay it down on the desk. It's not going to want to lay perfectly flat. It came from a curved surface. So that's another issue with engineered wood. Those veneered surface layers may want to try to curl up a little bit. So be aware of that. If it's, of course, properly manufactured, that shouldn't be an issue. But once in a while, you get a problem with a surface layer not being fully adhered. The adhesive fails or something like that, and it wants to kind of crown or pop up. So what are the advantages of engineered wood? Well, it has greater dimensional stability, doesn't expand or contract as much. It can be used in more humid environments, where solid wood, you probably would only put it if it's grade level, first floor or above. You wouldn't put it in the basement or any place that was lower than that. And because it's not a solid piece of wood, and different types of wood can be used on those lower layers of it, it lowers the cost of it. So think, though, about how long will it wear? Can it possibly be sanded? And you might have a question, well, which is better then, the solid or engineered? Well, when we have a long class, we get to debate this back and forth quite a bit. Unfortunately, time doesn't permit that right here. But the short answer to that question is it just depends on the circumstances and what the requirements are. which one works best in any given situation. So we also have bamboo in the category of wood flooring. It's not really wood, it's a grass, but people love that it's green and easily renewable. Bamboo grows so quickly, and it's kind of a fashionable thing. It resists the ultraviolet light, so it doesn't change colors like the hardwood does. And it's available in solid planks and engineered styles, just like the hardwood. And also something that generally hardwood doesn't come in is a strand woven style. We'll explain in a minute what that means. And there are variations of it depending which way the grain runs, the same as in hardwood. There's our fast-growing bamboo. And you can see how the grain looks differently if it's been cut vertically or horizontally, where the nodes are a little more visible. And there's some engineered layers of bamboo. The strand woven bamboo may have a Janka rating of 3,000 or even higher. It's very good at resisting scratches. Now, that's not to say it can't dent, it still might be dented. And really, how this is made is the key to how it can be so hard. If you think of a stalk of celery and those strands that are in it, you can pull those long strings out. Same thing with bamboo. It can be put in a chemical that kind of softens it up, and then you can get long strands of the bamboo. Those bamboo strands are put into a plastic or a resin and pressed together. And now you've got something that's a blend of the actual bamboo plus that resin. Now, you've made something that can't be sanded, for one thing. That resin really gums things up, but it also takes away any greenness to it, because now it's not natural, it's plastic. Cork is a wood product. It comes from the bark of the tree, though, rather than from the wood part of the tree, mostly from Portugal or areas with a similar Mediterranean climate. And although there's been a few years we haven't seen a lot of cork, it seems to be making a comeback recently. So it's green, it's recycled, it's hypoallergenic, it doesn't mold, it feels very good underfoot because of the cushionedness to it. And even if it tends to get some dents or scratches in it, it tends to heal itself up a little bit with time. So probably won't need sanding for most damage. It does change color, though, with sunlight, even more than some other hardwoods. And the newest thing in the hardwood market is something that's called hybrids, or a solid hybrid combination. It takes some of the best things out of engineered wood and adds it to a solid core. So the same kind of core that you might see in LVP and what we call solid core, or wood polymer core, wood plastic core, some of these that have stone cores in them, these new products, but now the top layer is real wood. So it's not plywood, it's a top layer of wood, but you've got some sort of solid core in the middle of it. Makes it still less expensive than hardwood, more expensive than engineered generally, but even less resistant to moisture. So it can handle moisture pretty well. And really hasn't even been out that long. I'd like to show you a piece of it that, I'm not sure if I stopped and showed this one now that I think about it. There's our engineered piece with the different layers. But here's our solid core piece. The center of that is actually made mostly from the same type of materials that you might know in stone and calcium carbonate that's part of marble and limestone. But the top layer is solid hardwood. So you're combining a couple of different kinds of flooring ideas into the to the same piece. So talk just quickly about the finishes on wood. The main purpose of the finish is to protect it, and it does influence the shine or the gloss level. Most of the finishes that you might apply to a floor today, to a floor that's already installed, they're going to wear off over time. They're really made to be sacrificial. The idea is that any damage that might have happened to wood if it wasn't finished instead happens to the finish, and then the finish can be removed and replaced. And if we go back a little bit in time, many of the early finishes were things like paste wax and shellac and varnish. Varnish is a combination of oil and resin, and these penetrated into the wood to some depth. So if you encounter them in cleaning, they may be a little more difficult to deal with because they tend to resist moisture, keep moisture out, but they're not just on the surface, they're deeper in the wood. Today, most of the finishes we deal with are film formers. They may be acrylic or urethane, or often a blend, and each of those has its own advantages as far as how it holds up over time, how much weight and durability it can resist scratches and that kind of thing. Does it have a tendency to turn yellow or brown? So there's all kinds of different pros and cons to each of these, but what you'll find is a lot of cleaners tend to use something that's fairly low solids, so it's easy to apply and sticks well, but it's a blend of acrylic and urethane. How can you educate your customers so that they can take care of their floors? They can use entry mats. They want to dry dust it very often because it's the gritty soil, the same thing that we know damages carpet fibers and scratches them up, scratches up the finish on the hardwoods. They want to use a neutral detergent with little or no cleaner, with no detergent or a little bit of detergent, because an excess of detergent left behind can make the finish cloudy. We don't want to use too much moisture. We want to avoid these oil type cleaners. Some of them even have oil in the name that tell you they're oily. They might be fine for wood furniture, but they're not intended for wood floors. There's also a tool called a steam mop that a lot of people like to use, and it puts very hot, damp moisture on the floor. Interestingly, if you want to test out the life of some finish for a wood floor, you expose it to repeated cycles of heat and moisture. That wears it out real quick, so you can find out in relatively short amount of testing what's the lifetime of that finish going to be. So using a steam mop, basically you're just accelerating the wear on it at the same time they would test it in the lab. That's something they want to avoid. Don't use something that's not intended for wood floors, and protect it from the marks that can be caused by stiletto heels or the claws from the dog that haven't been trimmed, or furniture being slid along, and from excessive sunlight that might change the color of it. So what options does someone have if they have to take care of their floor? Well, the most extreme is sanding. The goal with sanding is to repair the damage to the wood. That's gouges and dents and really heavy wear that's happened over time that's made the surface of the wood actually damaged, not just the finish, but the wood is damaged. Sand and screen is kind of a sanding process, but we're not really sanding down into the wood, we're sanding the finish. The goal is to get rid of the finish. Maybe a little wood comes with it, but we're repairing damage to the finish and replacing the finish. And for maintenance, to keep from having to go to either of those two options, the floor could be cleaned. You could clean and apply a preservation finish, or you may also want to remove a buildup of finish. And Doyle, let me ask, how much time have I got? I may need to adjust a little here.
You've got about 10 minutes left, Scott.
Okay. So what are the tools that you could use to do the cleaning with? Rotary type scrubber, like a 175 RPM floor machine or an OP machine, especially if you've got to remove a heavy buildup of something that the consumer has applied. They keep putting down their Mop and Glow or their favorite product from the grocery store or Walmart or whatever. These machines, because of their weight on the floor, help with that removal. The extraction cleaning with a floor scrubber, this might be whether it's from Karcher or it's from Lindhaus or it's from Windsor brand. There's just several different companies that make that. Clark makes a good one, especially a larger size one for commercial work. I like the Lindhaus one for residential. These are often the fastest to the results you want because they allow you to take a little bit less finish off, and therefore the finish dries quicker. And you can even clean with a counter-rotating brush, which Dane Gregory may talk about a little bit in the next few minutes. So this is a picture shared by someone that attended a class that I took recently. And you can see, even short of sanding or screening the floor, you can make a significant difference in the appearance by any of these three methods. So there's the extraction cleaning machines. And keep in mind that those hardwoods can last a long time. You certainly can make some significant profits by taking care of those kind of floors, and maybe have just a little time for question and answers then. So.
Hey, Scott.
Yes, sir.
There was a question about, could you repeat the information on using a steam mop, yes or no?
Absolutely no. Steam mop basically accelerates the wear on the finish, and although it can get the floor clean, it's going to wear out your finish prematurely and probably expose that floor then to soil and moisture quicker than you would have if you'd used some other system to keep it clean.
Okay, and then another question was Dirt Dragon. Do you have any experience with the Dirt Dragon?
Yeah, it does a fine job. It would fit into that group of like Clark, Karcher, Lindhaus. You know, I've never personally used the Dirt Dragon for anything more than just a demo on a small floor. I haven't used it out on a real life setting, so to speak. And to me, it seems a little less maneuverable than some of the other machines, but gives real good results.
Okay, and then could you repeat? There's a question. Could you repeat the third process? I think you were talking about the 3 different ways.
The third process is cleaning with a CRB. Didn't speak a lot about that, but for dry soil, like especially new construction, where there's been sheetrock mud sanded and there's all this dust all over, the CRB and the dry powder does an excellent job of removing that dry soil, doesn't scratch the finishes. And it can be also used for wet cleaning, where you spray on your cleaning solution first and then use the CRB to scrub it in.
Okay, and then there's one, can you get there's a question about what maintenance products to use once you're to reapply. Does that make sense? Okay.
Basically, for the cleaning process, you want to use something that's neutral, doesn't have solvents, because solvents will eat away at some of the finish, and has a minimum amount of detergent. You don't want too much detergent and leave a residue. And I don't think HydraMaster has that brand product. Is that correct?
I was going to suggest to our audience, your HydraMaster distributors carry a variety of wood floor care products. Ramsco, John Don, NSN guys, and then all the independents. Most everyone carries a full line of products. My recommendation is get in touch with them and go with a company that is making products that say on the label for wood floors. Sometimes people will recommend neutral floor cleaners and things like that that are made for tile. The chemicals that are formulated for wood are different than those. So make sure you go back to your HydraMaster distributor, and there's several good lines of products out there.
Yeah, exactly. Get something that supports your local distributor, and get something specifically made for wood as far as the cleaning. And then as far as putting back down a product, if you're not a wood floor expert, you probably want a low solid content, which means 8 to 12% solids and a blend of urethane and acrylic. That'll stick to the most surfaces and go down and level easily without showing marks from whatever tool you're applying.
Great. Well, we're about out of time, Scott, and several people have asked, how do they get in touch with you? So the first thing I wanted to ask is, are you doing another school? You said you were going to stop doing them after March. Are you doing another school?
I have no other schools planned at this time. I'm kind of wanting to really retire instead of just halfway retire, but I have a lot of people asking me for schools. So, at some time I may change my mind and do one or two more, but right now I have nothing planned and no intention of doing another school, but I may get talked into it.
Okay. And what's the best way for people to get in touch with you? Email, phone?
Let me put, email, and I think I can put it up on chat. Put on my glasses and make sure I typed in the right thing before I send it out there. Yeah.
All right. Yep, it's on there. I can see it. So jscottwarr, WARR @gmail.com is the best way to get hold of Scott. Hey, Scott, I thank you so much. Obviously, from the level of people that are listening in and the number of questions that we got, there's a lot of interest in this subject matter, just like you and I kind of thought there is. So we appreciate you sharing with us from a non-pressure point of view, to kind of take a look at it, step back, some of the options. I think it's one of our old mentors used to use the term, people are walking over dollars to get to dimes when it comes to wood floor care. And I think it's something that many people should consider as a possibility. So thank you very much for joining us today and doing the presentation. Any final thoughts you wanted to share?
Well, I just had one question for you, Doyle. How come all the other presenters got a HydraMaster t-shirt to wear, and I've just got to have my regular dress shirt and tie on now?
We'll have to get that rectified. Or do you want a t-shirt or a polo shirt?
Oh, I think I like the polo shirt. What Sean was wearing was pretty nice.
All right. We'll put that together for you. I can promise you that we can get you that. And any chance you're going to make it down to Charleston to the experience, since it's close to your home?
It's going to kind of depend on the COVID situation,
exactly.
Because my wife is really sensitive on chemo now. I got to be super careful about that.
Absolutely. Well, give your lovely wife Jenny a hug from all of us. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we appreciate having you.
Okay, nice to be here, Doyle. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks, Scott.